Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak what is good? For the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart. The good man brings out of his good treasure what is good, and the evil man brings out of his evil treasure what is evil. But I tell you that every careless word that people speak, they shall give an account for in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So again, he just breaking it down. I remember what I said in the beginning, man complicates things, but for God, it's really just light and darkness. It's truth and a lie. It's really broke down. And here he uses the sense of a good tree and a bad tree. The two different things. Notice ain't this and then five other. No, it's just good or bad. It's either a good tree or a bad tree. And this is where, again, talking about the source of where everything's coming from. Again, he's following up on what he's saying. Where's the root? If your root is there, he knew that in their heart, you had to be an evil tree to be able to speak to God in the flesh and tell him you're doing this of Satan. And he's saying, that's what I said. And that's why he makes the point, how can you be an evil even think about talking about doing good things? Because your heart is evil. The source is evil. So everything that comes forth from that is going to show forth the fruit of that evilness.
That's right. And that's so important with any walk for discernment on the outside, like looking at, testing spirits and testing prophecy and testing your brothers and sisters. That's so important to understand that Jesus uses a tree and a fruit, because an apple tree has apples. That's how we know it's an apple tree. When we see it, we know, oh, that's an apple tree because of the apples. We have spiritual fruit here too. And we know the fruit of God, and we know the fruit of sin and fruit of the flesh. We know the difference. And if we see someone who even is proclaiming to be of God, but there is no fruit of the Spirit there, and there is no fruit of God, then what kind of tree really is he? So that's the obvious look at this tree and fruit thing that we have to have. But I think it's so important that we don't brush over the part about what's in your heart is where it comes out. That's where we got to check. We got to start at the heart. Well, like, why are we doing it? We've been talking about motives for so long, but that's the reason. These Pharisees had motives of pride, of lording over men, of being the boss, of doing whatever they want, being, greeted in the marketplace, all these things. That was where their heart was. So that's why the fruit came out evil. And Jesus could see that. And to my dad's point before, that's what we got to do. Since we know that Jesus knows our heart and knows truly what we're thinking. And these Pharisees didn't know their own heart. They couldn't see it. And Jesus can. We, at today, and this is how this applies today, we need to go to God and say, God, shine your light on my heart. See if there's any evil motive in that heart so the fruit will come out. And how do we know we might need to check our hearts? What fruit is coming out? Are we producing patience, kindness, gentleness, joy? If we're not, it's no time to panic. It's time to go to God, because in his light, we see light. Show us, God, where we need this help. And that's really what I want to take from this is, are we examining our hearts? Because right there is where the treasure comes up, good or bad. But there is only two trees here, right, Dad? There's only two. It's good or bad. It's God, it's light or darkness, to your earlier point. And we need to be able to see that. And again, to your earlier point, we can't see that on our own. Our hearts are desperately sick and deceitful. They're not going to show us the truth. They're going to show us our motives. But if we go to God, he can see our hearts. He can know our thoughts, which is what Jesus has shown us today.
Exactly. And you bring out a good point, John. And I think that's it. Just that's something that we have to be able to judge, because it says, when the Lord is trying to teach his people how to have discernment and to judge between some of this good or bad, he says, judge them by their fruits. You're going to know the tree by its fruit. He's trying to let us know a way, but how do we know that? Because, and I think that therein is the difference of what we see sometimes, because we have battles. The reason why we have battles among ourselves sometimes as people of God is because we're not recognizing what type of fruit it is. You see, we fight over it because, remember, a good tree is going to produce good fruit. So you go up to an apple tree as an example, it should have apples in it because it's an apple tree. Now, if you go in there and there's a plum on there, that should tell you that something ain't right there. There's something wrong with that, because a plum doesn't grow on an apple tree. Now notice the reason why did I bring that out? They're both fruits. Both of them are fruits, but only one of them's true fruit from a true tree. And that's where we got to know the difference between those. Because and I think as people of God, that's why we got to even be careful when we're discussing and trying to decipher discern the truth among one another. We get caught up in, and sometimes we're fighting over what type of, well, this apple looks a little different than this apple, but they're both apples. And
Yep.
we're fighting over that. It's different than fighting over the fact that this is an apple and this is a plum. Now that's a more serious issue. Hey, wait a minute. What's this plum doing in here with the apples? There's
Yep.
a reason to deal with that and deal with it very firmly and harshly. But for someone to always fight over, well, that apple's a little bit more red than that one. That one's a little blemished or whatever. No, sometimes that's the way we are as brothers and sisters. We're fighting amongst each other, but they're really all apples. But we're being picky about the apples instead of being able to walk with one another in love and try to come to an agreement of the truth.
With the same illustration of the tree as it pertains to what identifying what fruit actually is, it's if it's an apple tree and it's got apples on it, it's an apple tree. Doesn't matter if it's a gigantic apple tree or a small apple
Mm-hmm.
tree, it's
Mm-hmm.
still an apple tree because it has apples. And on the flip side, if it is in the middle of an apple vineyard, I don't even know if it's called apple yard, wherever apples are, apple garden. Okay, if it's in the middle of an apple garden, it's huge, gigantic, birds are hiding on it, it's beautiful, but it's got a plum on it. Doesn't matter. That's not fruit. No matter how big it is, no matter how amazing it looks, if it's got a plum on it, it's not an apple tree. So, to my point, hopefully that made sense. When we're judging people's fruit, it doesn't matter how big they are, it doesn't matter how much money they are, it doesn't matter. It's like, are they showing that true fruit of God, the true fruit of the Spirit? That's how we know it's in the heart, and that really is discernment. And for, like I was telling Dad before the video, for some of us, like, we see some of these people on TV and we don't know, we're not too sure about them if they are truly producing fruit. Some of those things we can't really know because we need to know them. We need to know them and walk with them and be able to see, like, are they patient, are they kind, do they have that gentleness, are they showing this fruit? So that's two reasons that we don't need to stress ourselves out about it, about trying to call them out, because we don't really know. We don't really know what their fruit is. We know that, yes, they've got huge this, huge that. People say they love them. They've got these things that don't look like too much, but maybe that's a blemished apple. So what's our job? Just speak the truth. We don't have to judge. We don't have to judge everything.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And you brought out a good point earlier, and I said that by realizing what the fruit of the Spirit is, patience, love, kindness, all those type of things, that's so important in making this judgment. Because I've known lots of people, and you may have known people, sometimes, unfortunately, because we've made, religiousness to be a thing. So many people judge somebody by their amount of religiousness they have. So you'll have people, for instance, they'll make judgments, say, well, that's a good person. Why? Oh, because I know I've seen them. They read the Bible every day, or they do this every day. They go to church every Sunday, or they do this stuff, and that's not the true essence of the fruit of the Spirit. If I'm not mistaken, the fruit of the Spirit doesn't say, okay, one of the fruits of the Spirit is reading the Bible every day. One of the fruits of the Spirit is is going to church every day. See, that's not the fruit of the Spirit, like what you're talking about, John. It's patience, it's kindness, and stuff like that. That's why sometimes we get deceived, because we look at someone and we say, oh, yeah, they look like they do this. But we're supposed to have a righteous judgment to be able to see. This is kind of like what Jesus is doing, saying, hey, I know how you are, Pharisees. You're dressed up on the outside, but on the inside, there's nothing there. There's nothing. There's full of dead man bones. You see, because
Yep.
he's having true discernment. He's judging by true fruit, not the
Yep.
fruit that looks good on the outside. And I've told so many people that, because they say, well, they read the Bible and say, well, that doesn't mean anything. And I say that for us too. If you just look at us and if you think we're people of God just because we read the Bible or just because we do that, that doesn't mean anything. Because that's why I said, many people are going to come and say, I did all these things. And he's going to say, I don't know you. You see, so the real fruit is what John was saying about earlier, about that peace, patience, righteousness. John's heard me say many times, what are the main thing I look for to see if someone's really genuine? It's thankfulness. That's not even a work which you would say a certain thing you point to. Thankfulness. If you see somebody have a true thankful heart, then you know that that had to come from God, because we're not naturally thankful. We're naturally very selfish. So to be able to be thankful, That takes a work of God in someone's heart to be that way. So those are the type of things we're talking about by judging by true fruits.
Two things on this that we can apply practically. On one thing, first of all, when these fruits, we're not saying don't read the Bible. First of all, you should definitely read the
Mm-hmm.
Bible. What we're saying is that's not a fruit. Somebody that reads the Bible. You know who else read the Bible and went to church every day? The Pharisees, and they were dead wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They did the
That's
same thing.
right.
So that we're not obviously we have a Bible study podcast. So obviously Bible is good. We want you to read the Bible. Going to church, good. Fellowship's good. We said all that today. We're just saying that's not a fruit. You can do that for years and never actually want truth, so you don't receive any. And that's why Jesus called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, because they're just a
Mm-hmm.
shiny cup that's empty inside, like my dad said. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're in this walk, don't let this, we're talking about this fruit of the spirit here, and you're looking, and you've been going to church, and you've been reading the Bible, but this fruit we're talking about here, this gentleness, this patience, this kindness, you're not seeing a ton of. Don't be discouraged. Just go to God with that. Say, God, like, okay, I see you the fruit. I'm not producing this fruit, or I'm not producing enough of this fruit. What's the issue? And then God will work that stuff through you and show you. But another thing to do, don't be fooled by the liar that gets in your head and say, see, you're not patient, you're not kind.
Mm-hmm.
No, every time you're impatient and every time you're ungentle, and you, something in you says, man, I should have been patient, man, I should have been kind there, or you feel bad about not being kind, or you wish you were more patient, or you're praying to God, asking for patience. That's right there, proof the Spirit of God is in you, testifying to your flesh that still wants to do whatever it wants. So don't let the liar get you, because he's got me plenty of times with condemnation. If you're not the most patient, gentle, kind, joyful person on planet Earth, the very fact that there's something in your spirit, man, that wants to be that, that's the Holy Spirit of God testifying to you. Your inner man loves God and agrees with God. That's what Romans 7 talks about. But you still got your flesh back. So I just wanted to point that out there, because even when we're talking about this, the liar will try to come and see, you were impatient last week.
Mm-hmm.
That's not real
Mm-hmm.
fruit. You're the same person, and you got to know that when you were impatient, you felt bad about it, and you knew you should have been patient, but you slipped up, and we will continue to slip, and then the liar will
Mm-hmm.
come in and try to get you. So be free from that. If you're feeling any kind of condemnation, if you're not producing massive amounts of this fruit, just go to God with it and say, God, okay, I see this is the fruit of the Spirit of God, and I want what you want. So help me with this. I can't do this on my own. And He'll answer that prayer.
Absolutely, John. And that's a perfect segue into one last thing I want to touch on this passage is those last two verses. But it says, but I tell you, every careless word that people speak, they shall give an account for in the day of judgment. For by your words you'll be justified, and by your words will be condemned. This can make people a little shaky, a little scared, like what you said. They're reading this. There's questions here. Okay, what is this saying here? Wait a minute. I thought we were justified by faith. What does it mean by your words you'll be justified? And by your words you'll be condemned. So what we see right here, John, is when it's talking about this, it talks about, it talks about careless word. What's God talking about? He's just talking about that, again, taking it in context of what he's talking about. The Pharisees are just rattling off all this stuff. And what is he saying? He said, ultimately, you're going to give an account for what you're saying. So you need to think about what you're saying here, because God knows your thoughts, first of all. So when you start speaking up, you're going to give an account for that. And again, taking in context what he said, what did he say? Good tree brings out good fruit, bad tree brings out bad fruit. So again, it's not talking about the overallness of whether you believe in it. It's just talking about ultimately you're going to, when you speak things, and we got to realize it says in, I think, what is it, James word, John? It talks about the tongue and the words, of how many things we set on fire by our tongue, by our words. Our words carry power. We got to realize that even as people of
Life and
God.
death.
Exactly. Be careful what you're saying. Be cautious, be quick to listen and hear and slow to speak, realizing that words do carry a lot of weight. We got to be cautious about that, not in a fear condemnation way, but just in a loving way before God, realizing that God, you've given me words of life or death. Like John just said, I need to be careful how I use this that you've given me. That's really
Yep.
what we're talking about here. So just my thing is just be careful when we speak. Always be cautious on making sure that we're walking in the trueness by the Spirit of love, so that even if God has us in a place where we're maybe having to lead somebody into a truth that where they're deceived or something's wrong, but to do it in love and in patience.
Yep. That's what I take from it. It's just that he just talked about from your heart. is where the treasure comes out. And if you have
Mm-hmm.
evil heart, the words that come out are going to be evil, and those are going to justify you or condemn you. Just like the
Mm-hmm.
Pharisees, they're spouting out all this stuff because it's coming from an evil, selfish, agenda-filled heart, and not from a good place. And he's just saying all these little words that you're saying without even thinking about, you're going to be held accountable for. And we
That's
should
right.
all think that way. We shouldn't be rattling off. That's what I was just talking about. Being careful about saying a brother or sister is from the devil or doing something from the devil when we don't know. We just need to be careful and stop just spouting off stuff. And we see that a lot on YouTube, Dad. Just people just spouting off, and that's because of
Yep.
the attention span of the audience. That's what they
Yep.
want. They just want a quick blah
Yep.
blah 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 blah, exciting,
Mm-hmm.
exciting thrill. But what are you saying? We got to stop and think about what's actually coming out of our mouth. And I've been
That's
guilty of
right.
that too, especially with these
Mm-hmm.
shorts. Sometimes I just think like, wait, this could be taken out of context. This could be that. And I need to slow down and just think about what I'm saying. It's not about just saying words. It's about delivering what God said or what comes from that. And I think it's very important that we take account of our words and we focus on what we're saying, and we stop and think, rather, of what we're saying. Should this be said? Does this need to be said? Kind of thing.
That's right. And when we're doing that, John, like what you said, that's so true. When we're doing that, who are we stopping and think? It's before God. Remember, that's the one who we got ultimately, who we're supposed to be serving to please, because he knows what's right. The reason why I say that is because we can't always worry about what everybody else, because obviously in this day and age, you can say something that's just straight out loving truth, and people can, oh, yeah, I can't believe you talk to me like that. You condemn me, or so we can't be always just concerned how somebody's going to take what we're saying. We have to be concerned before God that we're saying it in the appropriate way before Him, so that we know that if He's pleased and it's going forth, it's always gonna be blessed. That's the
Amen.
important part.
Check with Papa. That's what we're saying. All right, don't
Exactly.
just spout it out. Don't you? Well, hey,
Hmm.
you know this is. If you got kids, you know this. You don't want them to just go saying everything at the store, all your business
Hmm.
in front of the family party when your kid says, "Oh, Dad, remember that time you did that when nobody was looking?" You don't want that, okay? So our Papa's the same way. He's gonna check. You need to check that at the front door, son. And some things too, God gives us. He gave it to us. This is what I have to work on a lot. I just feel like I want to tell every time God shows me something. Sometimes it's just for me, and sometimes the person you tell, they're not on that level yet to hear it. They don't need to hear it right now. Maybe it's too much for them. Maybe it's solid food and they're on milk. So just be mindful, like my dad said. Check it with God before you say things. It's important to stop before you say things and think about it, especially
Absolutely.
when it pertains to the truth of God.